My name is Ken Donovan, and I'm the meeting convener for the Old Sydney Society. And tonight, I'm going to try to give you a 50-year history of the Old Sydney Society. And it's a little bit humbling because Dr. Don Arsenault is sitting right here. He is one of the founders. And Vince McLean is back there, and John Curry, all former presidents. But Don is the senior man, and Vince is the junior in this case. So, but Don is. And so I'm trying not to exaggerate. I taped Don and Bob in 2006 when they spoke here on the 40th anniversary. And I have the tape, and I had it in my car. And I'm trying not to exaggerate, but for the last 2 months, I've listened to that tape over and over again. And I said to Barb, I said, how come those guys are so funny? We laughed the whole way through. They each sat on a stool, and they would talk and then hand it over to the other guy. I said, Barb, how come I can't do that? She didn't say anything. She just looked at me. As if to say, well, maybe you don't have the sense of humor. Do you know what I mean? But the ability to talk and make people laugh, it's a special skill. I think I asked Don at one point, I said, you guys didn't seem to get much respect in the early days. And he's got such a sharp wit. And he said, what do you mean the early days? That's a Don Arsenault reply. Too funny. Like, they don't get any today either. So what I'm going to try to do tonight is take you through 50 years. So you ready for the ride? Yeah. I've gone through 50 years of minutes. And I interviewed Vince, and I listened to Don and Bob. And there's more stuff that definitely can be looked at, but I'm going to give it my best shot. Howard, screen look okay? Yeah. Okay. So I'd like to just tell you a bit about the 1960s. We got to remember, in 1966, it was 21 years after the Second World War ended. My dad went to war because he was conscripted. Virtually every Canadian soldier went to war in the Second World War because they were conscripted. No volunteers. They knew about the First World War. So there were no outside cafes in Paris by that time. Talked to Peter Mook about this. Think about it. They're still recovering. So that's the context, the background for the period we're dealing with. There was only 2 museums in Cape Breton, the Bell Museum and Louisbourg, Catherine McLennan's. And that was about it. There was doubtless the Marguerite Salmon Fisheries Museum, but I'm pretty sure they were open, but a very small museum and a particular one. And there were no historical societies, none. There were no grants, no money. Governments didn't think of heritage. And it sort of makes sense to me. And usually when you study history at the local level, it's a sign of broader things throughout the world. So yeah, they were just, and the Second World War was a worldwide war. It just wasn't a European war. So that's a little bit of background for what we're dealing with. And so by 1966, there's a call for centennial projects. In the tape, Don Arsenault talks about John Fisher with this beautiful melodious voice. He was on CBC. I remember him. And in 1965, I believe, he was hired to coax people to get excited about centennial projects. Everybody needed a centennial project. So by golly, the stage was set. So in Cape Breton, perhaps you can think of others, but the Old Sydney Society was started as a centennial project. Nina Cohen got the Miners Museum going. The Men of the Deep And they're just celebrating their 50th anniversary, aren't they? Yeah. Boardmore Theatre, Liz and Harry came here in 1966, and they were just up across the street. And so this exhibit is all about them and their theatre work. And all the theatre that came out of Cape Breton is due to them. And Eileen's Forster School of Dance. Now, maybe you can think of other things, and that would be great. But specifically as centennial projects. So this is out of my personal collection. It's a picture of St. Pat's, about 1890, I figure. See this building here with those small dormers? Those are 18th century dormers. So I'm probably going to be donating this to the Beaton at some point. Or maybe the Old Sydney. Or maybe both, I don't know. But there's St. Pat's, about 1890, and it's been there since 1828. Well, it was there in 1966, but it was falling down. It was leaking. It was, all the plaster had fallen off the walls inside. It was going to be torn down. And Ken MacLeod had an article in yesterday's paper on Moxham's Castle, April 26, 1966. Just around this time, Moxham's Castle was burned down. So this little building is in danger. Okay, and Bob Morgan's driving by here since '62, and he said, "What is that church?" he said. And everybody would say, "The Syrian church." And he said, "Well, what's that mean? What's the Syrian church?" And it was the Syrian and Lebanese church. And so Bob Morgan and Don Arsenault got it in their head to have St. Patrick's Church as a centennial project. And in order for it to work, they had to have a society. So they formed the Old Sydney Society in 1966. This is the first meeting, and you can see, I don't know if you can see them, but Sander Mugga, an Old Sydney family, he was the first president, and Don was from St. John, New Brunswick, and Bob was from Windsor, Ontario. So they said, we're from away, we better get a local guy to be president of the society. There's Don Arsenault, Sister Margaret Beaton, the Catherine McLennan. The McLennans were industrialists who stayed in Cape Breton. She started collecting blood in the 1940s during the war. Hilda Day, very, very smart woman. And look at Bob Morgan, how handsome that guy is. I swear to God, every woman that ever met him loved him. They did. But take a look at him. He had that infectious personality and just, you know, over-the-top personality, but a very nice person and engaging. So they got the idea. Bob had his history class, 1966. Mary Kay MacLeod and Ann Coleman, the Ann Coleman. And Mary Kay went on to become a professor, and Ann Coleman went on to become a tremendous interpreter at Louisburg. Just incredible personality. Could do anything, really, with a beautiful voice and looks to match. So the place was a dump inside. All the plaster had fallen off the walls. And in the tape, they said, Bob and Don said, we had Angus McDougall. He had a loader, and he volunteered the loader to us. And he said, we loaded all his junk into the loader, stripped it all out. But the church would have been lost without what the people have did. And this is Bob's class, and Bob said, of course, they all passed by the end of the summer. They all did well. They'd go to class in the morning, summer school, and they'd be working on cleaning out the church in the afternoon. Really hands-on experience, huh? So, and I introduced Don and Bob at the time, and Father R.J. McSween, who I knew and respected at St. Vex, he taught there for 44 years, he said, you don't go to universities usually to get people of men of action in the community. That was his interpretation. And I said, well, Don is a professor and Bob is a professor, but these guys were the exception to the rule. They were men of action in the community. And, you know, it bears out. But I think Father McSween was probably right. You sort of get in your little enclave and you live in your own little world and you do your research and you're writing and teach. So these are some of the milestones of the Old Sydney Society by my reckoning. 1966, so the Old Sydney Society gets the deed and owns the land for St. Patrick's Church. They get it for $1. 1975, the Old Sydney Society buys the Cosset House. And it was a struggle because the Nova Scotia Museum didn't want to have a regional museum in Cape Breton. There were about 20 on the mainland. There were none. And it's a very big deal because Cosset House is administered by the Old Sydney Society, but it gets ongoing funding, special funding through Nova Scotia Museum because it's one of the regional museums. And Bob said he remained bitter to the day, 2006, that Lynn Martin of the Nova Scotia Museum wouldn't agree to it. But guess what happened in 1977? Vince McLean, who's right back there, gets in the cabinet. Minister of Lands and Forests. And Bob gets us a regional museum, Cosset House. We would not have it without Vince McLean, okay? Public acknowledgement. It's all there in the minutes. The 1988, we finally get this center right here. The Old Sydney Society, along with the City of Sydney, and I forget who the third partner was. I guess the Bicentennial, or the people that looked, the Lyceum Heritage Society, raised the money, about $100,000, and then they got a COA to help and restored this building. And now it's ready for another refresh, as we know. 1991, after Joan Harris sees what's going on in the North End with the Old Sydney Society, she's been very active. She was a wealthy woman. She's now deceased. She went out, she bought the Jost House. She restored that house. And with the help of the Old Sydney Society and the museum, Nova Scotia Museum, she turned it into a museum. And she set up a sizable endowment to run that house in perpetuity. And she gave it to the Old Sydney Society. We own that house, thanks to Joan Harris. But I think Joan saw what we were doing, and she frankly wanted to leave a legacy. And she said, what better way to do it? So these are the milestones, at least as I see them. Cosset House in 1977, but we needed the minister. We needed clout in government to make it happen. And I talked to this about this with Vince McLean. And here's the opening here, and you see Bob there on the left, and Nan Moore, and Reverend Mel Finley, former president of the society, Alderman Alec McGuinness, World War II veteran from the North End, very proud and a great supporter, and lots of other people in there. I'm sure you may know them, but I don't know them all. So I'm just going to tell you about some of the activities that the society did over the years. So, bus tours from 1972 to 1994, and Linda Krause organized them all. And she'd write these beautiful, handwritten, long notes describing the tour. Do we have enough for one bus? Are we going to have enough for two? And there's Diane Schwartz and Annette Purcell, who taught me in grade 5. And so Linda would lead them each year, and they went to Arashat, they went to Highland Village, they went to Mabu, Antigonish, all over the place. Cape North, they went everywhere. And here's a trip to Antigonish in 1998. Naturally, they would go to the museum, and they'd set it all up. Jocelyn Gillis, who was probably the curator of the Antigonish Museum, Yvonne Campbell, Nan Moore, Linda Krause, Louise Smith, a long-time volunteer for the Old Sydney Society, Dr. Mary Lynch, who spoke here and did elocution in the Lyceum, And of course, Bob Morgan. So, the society was always active. And I title this Plaques, Tree Plantings, Commemorations, Monuments, Cairns, and Statues. None of this happened before the Old Sydney Society. So now we're going to have the unveiling of a merchant statue down on the boardwalk on Sunday. But there's been a precedent created for this. It never really happened before then. So it creates a sense of civic pride and action in the community. And I'm sure that it's what's happening on a broader scale as well. So, in 1971, they have the National Historic Sites and Monuments Board come down and they establish 2 plaques to Governor J.F.W. DeBar and Jean Bourneau. Both, DeBar was the founder of Cape Breton, and Bourneau was a respected parliamentarian and wrote the Rules of Order for Parliament. You know, highly respected. It's just opposite St. Patrick's Church. Guess who came down to unveil this? The future Prime Minister of Canada, Jean Chrétien. He was Minister of Indian Affairs and Northern Development at the time. He came down and did this. It was a very big deal. Very big deal. 1971. Here's a tree planting, and there's a young guy from grade 4, Peter Pierre, from Eastmount School. Where was Eastmount School?
Whitney Pier.
Whitney Pier? Okay. Opposite Westmount, I guess.
Very good, Ken.
Thank you, thank you. Sandy McVicker, very active in the Old Sydney Society. He might have been a president. Jim McMillan, the first volunteer curator of the Old Sydney Society, retired postal worker from the North End. He was volunteer curator from 1972 to 1981. He was always crazy about the Jost House, or Cosset House, one of them. And Jim Lovelace, former president of the Old Sydney Society. And I got to tell you this one. Bob says on the tape, they would be meeting all over the place. The Old Sydney Society didn't have a home at that time like this. So they'd meet in the Baptist church. They'd meet in the old sergeant's mess quarters, which was a dump, I guess, a real dump down in Victoria Park and other areas. And they'd always be looking for a meeting place. And Club 55, and they'd pay them $10 and pay for the heat and lights. And Jim Lovelace was president, and they never had any chairs. So at one meeting, they knew somebody, and the guy said, $5 each, and I can get you good chairs. So Jim Lovelace said he made a plea for chairs. Okay? And the Post covered it the next day, and it said, Jim Lovelace made a plea for chairs. And Bob said, you had to know Jim Lovelace. He went ballistic. He was by the book. And he wrote a letter to the editor of the Post, and he said, that's plea. I would never pee before such an august body as the Old Sydney Society. Oh, God. I still laugh about that every time I hear about it. Bob is so good on the delivery. And the other 2 people are, well, that's Mayor Earl Tabret, who I think was the youngest mayor in Canada at the time. I think he was 30 when he was first elected. Angus McKillop and Earl Dumont, and I don't know this gentleman. But this is the young Peter Pierre.
Where was the street light?
Just opposite St. Patrick's Church. You see the church in the background? And I went down. I was going to take a photo of the tree. It's massive now. Beautiful. So next time you're down there, take a look at the plaques and take a look at the rest. But I want to tell you some more. Because opposite there, from almost 2 blocks from the Lion, way up until the other end, the vista is empty. There's nothing there. So this is a cairn that was erected for the first arrival of the Scots, the ship Northern Friends in 1802 in Sydney Harbour. and 245 people. So it's 175th anniversary, yes, 1977. But guess what? Vince McLean comes in again because Joan Harris was going through the minutes, it's on the tape, and somebody else, and the bank went straight down. So Vince had the power to get the soil moved there. You know, Minister of Lands and Forests. So all kinds of soil was dumped there, and then they keep saying in the minutes, you know, tell Vince to get more soil, Bob. more soil, not enough. So they keep coming with the truckloads of soil. And you go down there now, and there's a bench there, there's a beautiful cairn, other plaques as well. And so they would use any excuse for commemoration. And that's what it's all about, commemoration. 150th anniversary of the St. Patrick's Church, the Lebanese and Syrian Association, Bob Morgan, Reverend Mel Findlay, former president, Verna Andrea, and they did Lebanese and Syrian dances, Reverend Father Doyle, and Alderman Larry McLean. This building opens in 1988, September 10th. We get our first full-time curator, December 1986. But it took a while to get our feet going. But what a boost that was. We had a full-time employee. Joyce is our director. We have Joyce Franken. We have a full-time employee, which just puts you into the stratosphere. Before then, it was all volunteer. Just a bit on the exhibits. The official opening of St. Pat's takes place on 16th of July, 1967. This is what the first exhibit was. And this is how good the minutes are. Display on the founding of Sydney by Governor J.F.W. DeBar in 1784. Admiral Perry comes here, gets his supplies on the way to the North Pole, 1909. History of lighting, and get this, how to establish a museum such as this. So these guys were conscious of what they were doing. They didn't have a copper at the time, but they knew there was federal monies available. But you needed an organization, a nonprofit, to go for it. So I think, you know, that they had the best of intentions. They weren't keeping this all to themselves. They wanted other community organizations to establish museums. And now we have quite a few in Cape Breton. But Don Arsenault and Bob Morgan and those other people, they were the real champions, Don and Bob, started this. This is an exhibit from 1989 at St. Pat's. And I remember that case down there. That's from the Bell Museum. I don't know if you remember them, but those old cases. And Jack Stevens said, you can have those, Ken. And so I got a truck from Parks Canada, and they delivered them, and we used them for years. And then I think we passed them on. They were beautiful cases. Brass trim and glass, heavy glass. This place opens on September 10th, 1988. We finally have our first exhibit. Bob Morgan on the right, Hilda Day, Jane Mason Brown, the artist who did the backdrops, Maura McCoe, our first curator, who's now head of cultural resources at Louisburg, and myself. So we went on and we opened our first exhibit. And so Don Arsenault was keen on the Center for Heritage and Science. He's a scientist, a chemist. And Bob was big on heritage. So here we have a display on natural heritage, right here. And this is my wife, Barb, here. I think that's Pam Seville. And there's Elizabeth Beaton. Anybody know? Elizabeth's here tonight. Anybody know those other people? I don't. But there was a giant crowd for that opening. Lots of photos. And you see that little punt over there on the right? That's my grandfather's boat. He died on Good Friday in 1946. He lived in English Center, and he, after being expropriated from the park, had to get that in. I don't care. One little word. I'll shout it out. And I'm going to write about it, believe me. Well, after he died, and by the way, he had beans that evening before he went to church or that day. My father is 91. He still doesn't like beans to this day. Okay. Tom James Donovan. That was his boat. And I said, well, that would make a nice piece for the museum. So we got it out of the basement, my uncle's basement. We did a little minor repair. And we had it painted the original colors. And somehow I got it up here for the exhibit. So that's my grandfather's boat. He died in 1946, Good Friday. So these are some of the other exhibits, and I remember this one, Pam Newton, at the seaside. I mean, she's just incredible talent. She taught for years at Riverview, did the plays. And doesn't it look beautiful, that exhibit? You know, it's at the seaside. And the first one is 1895, bathing suit. 1910, no, 1885, 1895, and 1910. Beautiful, huh? And she made all these costumes and supplied the mannequins and did all that. And she had another exhibit on Victorian costume, and there's Pam in her costume. She's doing the same thing right now for Horizon Achievement. I phoned her today, and I told her she was going to be in the show, but she said she couldn't make it tonight. She was just laying low because she's been really busy. These are some of our other exhibits, and believe me, we have had hundreds of them. Hundreds. And they're all in the minutes. And the overwhelming majority are based on local history. This was a particularly beautiful one for the Ukrainian church. This is some of our long-term staff. Elaine Bagnall worked for us for 22 years. Jenna Maltby was our second curator. Maura got another job at Lewisburg as a conservator almost immediately. Then we hired Janet. Well, did we ever luck out? She was an incredible person. And she had a beautiful personality, able to mix with people. Everybody loved her. And Joan Harris loved her. And we all wanted to, make her look good. And she was here for a long time. And then she went on to the Nova Scotia Museum. And guess what? She went into a big job, and she heads all of the museums of Nova Scotia now. Yeah, so she did a lot of cutting of her teeth here, but the exhibits she put on were just amazing. Joyce is our current director, and Peyton was another long-time curator. So these are 4 of our longest-serving staff. Heritage Teas. So actually, this is the opening of a wedding exhibit, 6th of June, 1999. That was particularly beautiful. Esmond Cook, a longtime volunteer, donated 50 years of pharmacist. He spoke here on this. Betty McNeil, Ann Moore, David Newton, who still leads walking tours from the Jost, and Valerie Bobak, a longtime board member. So, Don Arsenault. I listened to the tape, and Grace supported him all the way. They even had a baby, Peter, on October 2nd, 1967, centennial year. But we started to get recognition. We, the collective we. Don was awarded with a Lifetime Heritage Achievement Award on 11th of March, 1999. So this is Mark Arsenault, and this is Donna Eisen, who's daughter-in-law to Don. That's Catherine, who I think was about a year old in 1967, I think. Don with the award. Don's beautiful wife, Grace, who's passed away. Andre, the Crown Prosecutor, and Therese, who's a professor in New Zealand. Very successful family. But Don was raising a large family, but he was still doing all of this public stuff. And he was a chemist. So it's just amazing when you read about it through the minutes. And listen to it. So, some of the other achievements: preserving historic architecture. Here's the Lion down on the Royal Bank from 1901, and the Old Sydney Society moved it. And somebody said, "Well, how did you move it?" And Bob said, "Well, there just happened to be a vice president of the Royal Bank from Sydney." So that didn't hurt. So they moved the Lion down to St. Pat's in 1975, and in 1980 they got the wherewithal to move the Lion down on the corner. So there's the corner, and way up, that's all that in front of the St. Pat's. None of that would have happened with the Lion, without the Old Sydney Society. But a lion standing is a symbol of a country at war. Okay? And Great Britain was fighting the Boers in South Africa. And the Boers were fighting a guerrilla war. In Canada, you go to the park in Halifax, Victoria Gardens, and you'll see there about 11 veterans there who were from Nova Scotia who died in that war. And that was an imperial war. And it was a guerrilla war being fought by the Boers, the Dutch South Africans. And they were putting up a revolt. And they were fighting a guerrilla war, a new type of war. So the British Army was not doing too well against them. So what the British Army did is they took the women and children and put them in concentration camps. And the Boers were forced to come in. One of the beginnings, maybe not the first, I don't know, of the concentration camp. And a lion at war, okay? We were part of the colony, so we were at war. That's why you had the lion standing in 1901. So next time you see that lion, take a look. It means a lot. There's a lot of history there. So keeping the memory, mementos, plaques, cairns, commemorations. And guess what happened, you know? You know what happened to us? With the new plaquing of the provincial government, St. Patrick's Church became the first building in Nova Scotia to receive the new plaque. You know why I know that? I have the letter. I was president of the Old Sydney Society at the time. That's why I know that. So it's right down there on the building. Imagine, Lynn Martin didn't want to give us a museum, and we get the first plaque building in Nova Scotia. What do you think of that?
Justice.
Yes, Don Arsenault gets a Lifetime Achievement Award for Heritage, and guess who gets the next one? The Joan Harris. So we're riding high, and we have 4 museums. St. Pat's, the Lyceum that you see here, Cosset, and Jost. Isn't it beautiful? They're all beautiful, aren't they? Every one of them. 2 18th century buildings, 1828, 1904. None of those buildings, these 3 for sure, wouldn't exist without this society. They would not. Now the lion is crying. Not everything is successful. By the way, when I showed the lion, it was thanks for trying, saving the lion. Ronnie McCacken, 1980, The Rise and Follies, second version. Okay. These are pictures from when ECBC has always been a good partner of ours. Before that, Devco. But they really dropped the ball on this one, the guy who was heading it from Stellarton. cut off the power, cut off the heat, took away the security guards. So we brought a guy in from the beautiful heritage art restoration architect. He said, you don't need $3 million for this. You can save this building for about $200,000. This was the fireplace inside, the bar. Look at this beautiful round room here. And did you ever see a round radiator before? Did you? Anybody in here ever see one before? Perfect. I didn't. That's why I took the picture. I couldn't believe it, my eyes. But it was a beautiful building, but we lost it. And we also lost this building. We were feeling pretty cocky. 9698 Charlotte Street. It was an 18th century building. And we were pretty cocky because the man, you know, we got a sale for it and we started talking about it. Mistake. Somebody came behind us and made a higher offer. And they wanted to just destroy it because it wasn't doing so well. And our aim was to get the building, restore it, sell it to a lawyer or somebody else that wanted to set up shop there or a private residence. But we lost it because we started talking. Lack of experience. Now we know better. But by golly, we recovered after those losses. The Yacht Club was a loss. 9698 Charlotte was a loss. That's the door from 9698 Charlotte. But by golly, we have the whole building in the back room, the 18th century building. So one day we're going to have an exhibit with that building reassembled right in here. We have the timbers. Eric Krause, who, by the way, did an awful lot of work on Cosset, and he was an architectural guru from Lewisburg, brilliant guy. So we have another success immediately after this. We partner with the Sydney Architectural Conservation Society. We put up through, guess who? Don and Grace Arsenault donated $9,000 to us, to Saks, through the Old Sydney Society. We set up a totally legal agreement. They have a revolving fund. We can give a charitable receipt. And we gave the money to Saks in the Architectural Conservation Society, and they went and got the Liscombe House. We volunteered to, it was leaking, it was a Mrs. Ellman in California, owned this property. After a year, year and a half, we finally got a hold of her, said, would you be willing to sell it? We bought it for a certain price. We put a roof on it. It was leaking probably for about 3 or 4 years, not good inside. Cleaned it all out, and we saved the building. And we sold it, and we made money. Sydney Architectural Conservation Society did. Revolving fund. You take the money you make, and then you reinvest it in another building. And we went on to do that. So Mr. McKeegan, Ken McKeegan, who bought this, he bought the Landry House. Same date as the Cosset House. You see the 3 19th century dormers? That's what Cosset looked like before it was restored. And he also bought the Market House, 1802, and restored that to period. Right on Amelia Street, named after Governor DeBar's daughter. So we had, the lion was crying for a while, but now he's happy again. So the whole gist of my talk tonight, none of this would have happened without the thousands upon tens of thousands of volunteer hours. Tens of thousands. And I'm just going to point out a few people, that's all. And that's a dangerous thing to do, but hey, I think you get the drift. Howard and Dorothy Hoban, longtime volunteers. They're both dead now. And tonight, when we celebrated Nan Moore leaving here, she was a champion of this organization. We had Don Arsenault, Bill English, Nan, Donnie Ward, John Curry was here tonight, and myself. We got 6 together for a picture that night. And more volunteers, Ann McMullen, Bonnie Elliott, Teresa Soritz, who for years was our secretary and treasurer. Grace Arsenault, serving tea there. Ray Peters. Ray was at DevCo, and Ray was very good to us. This one publication we had, Old Sydney Town, Ray said, "You're not going to let me down, Ken, are you?" I said, "Ray, I know I'm not going to let you down." He went to bat for us. We got a good chunk of money to get Lewis Parker. I said, "Ray, I'm not going to let you down." And Redmond O'Keefe, another former president. China. China cups. The Americans freak. They get off the cruise ship and they take a walking tour of the North End. They come in here and they're served tea by these beautiful women that I'm going to show you in a minute who volunteer and serve them tea in China cups. They freak. They actually do freak. You're not going to get this anywhere else. Go try it. Try a museum in North America.
And tonight to get it for free.
Free, yes. And Vince McLean was, guess what? He becomes mayor of Sydney. So we're riding the pig's back. We have Pauline Cowley, Matilda LeBlanc, Natalie, who's married to Vince, and she's here tonight. Vince McLean, I've been president, I don't know, 5 times, who's a mayor, and Joan Harris, the lovely Joan Harris. Eileen Fraser, Louise Smith, and Bob says this on the tape. Louise worked at St. Pat's all day. She was a tremendous volunteer. And she went home and she died that night after volunteering all day. That's what Bob said on the tape in 2006. And Bob and Don name a lot of early people. And Cindy Anthony and Joan Darlington. And there's the famous Dolly. She's here tonight. See her? Dolly Peters and Ray, a 1-2 punch for this organization. Long time, committed, action out volunteers. And Heather Muse, who's married to Dave Muse, former mayor. And this is Dolly and her ladies. Some of them are here tonight. Dolly right there, Elaine McPherson, Joan Wall, Bev Miles back there. Somehow Howie got stuck in there. I don't know how he did that. Probably Dorothy looking back at us. Joan Wall and Valerie McPherson. Just 2 of the 14 ladies who serve thousands of people volunteer this teas. Isn't that something? And Ida Eisen, Betty Weeks, who's here, and Betty celebrated her 90th birthday in here. And Wendell Steele, who works for us, came in. He was wheeled in a box. And he had red underwear on. He's pretending he's a fireman. He's got a fireman's hat. And he jumps out of the box, and Betty's going to open it. She just splits a gut. Wasn't that a great surprise, Betty? I swear to God, she fell in love with Wendell that day. And Rebecca Lane, Stephen Lane's mom, who was great help to us. But I'll never forget that, Betty. Long-time volunteer. Publications. There was a lot of them. Collection of essays in 1973, all kinds of pamphlets. And Nan Moore, Bob Morgan, Nan Moore, Ann McMillan, Ed Weaver, longtime treasurer, and Betty Weaver. Tastes of Old Sydney. Raised money. Old Sydney Town. This is where Ray really came through with us, Parks Canada. We did this beautiful book, and we received a juried award from the American Society of State and Local History in California, juried by the Nova Scotia Museum and the Provincial Archives of Nova Scotia. We kept the original artwork. We paid Lewis Parker, and it really helped to encourage the heritage movement in the North End, this book. Won the Barbara Ellis Prize in 5 different categories for design. Parks Canada put a ton of people into it. And then we had the speaker series that's been ongoing since a long time, and there's Don, Bev Tennyson, and Brian Tennyson. So you see why Brian fell in love with Bev? He spoke on John Borno in 1972. And that speaker series has been ongoing steadily since 1972. Esmond Cook, he spoke here on 1992. I've got a tape of it. And there is Gordon Nash, longtime volunteer, Don, Esmond Cook, and myself. The lovely Joan Harris again. And I think that's Eldon Mickle, I'm not sure. But
It's Marguerite Campbell.
Marguerite Campbell, yes. And Brian McDonald spoke on the history of the Lyceum. Tony McKenzie had taught me history, and Louise Mann, she sang here one night in a presentation. Florence McLeod is no longer with us. And this was sweet. Donnie Ward spoke, but look who's accompanying him. What a lucky guy. Mary Dobson, her sister Teresa McDonald, Rosalie, and Chris Thompson. I mean, how lucky was he? He's got 4 beautiful librarians with him. Doesn't get any better. They're all as sweet as they look, including Donnie. And Elizabeth Beaton, who's here tonight, spoke on the Marguerite Salmon Museum. And this was our speaker last month. And lots of beautiful ladies there, girl power all the way. Becky's here tonight, so. And so thanks to all of you, the Old Sydney Society is still relevant and more vital than ever. And we had 26,000 visitors last year. Thank you very much. If you have any questions, we'll take a few and see what big lies I can come up with.
How did you get in all the pictures?
Disgusting, isn't it? I was going to cut myself out of the Tony McKenzie one. It wasn't very good. But I made sure. I came down tonight and I scanned that one of Elizabeth Beaton and Barb. I said, oh, I got to get Barb in this one. So I came down at 4:30 and got her in, and it was a beautiful exhibit, though. Beautiful. Yeah, it really was. So, but I got Natalie in there, too. And Catherine, and there's a lot of people in there. I didn't get Sandy in. So we had so many partners over the years, and we still do. But it's all incremental. A little bit here, a little bit there. Not getting too big for your britches, and just picking away. And different independent sources of funding. We don't have one source of funding. We have different sources. CBRM has been a good partner, and the City of Sydney was. They've stood by us. Parks Canada has been a tremendous partner. Other museums, great partners. Nova Scotia Museum, a great partner. You know, we've grown strong through their help and support. And plus, everybody in this room, all the people that have volunteered. If you had to pay people for that, you could never afford it. You just couldn't. So that's the story. Thank you very much.
Stay there for a moment. So you've seen some of the comings and goings. Ken has been organizing this lecture series for how many years?
Oh, a few.
So I think Vince McLean is going to come up and just to show our appreciation for all that you've done. We have something for you.
I want to, on behalf of the Society, to thank Ken for all of the years that he has put in with the society as a volunteer, doing numerous jobs, including being president a number of times. But the most important job that he does is that he continually, year after year after year, organizes the speakers to come in to speak to us on Thursday nights. He also has a very large emailing list that he contacts endless number of people, notifying them of the various events within our society. And Ken, we want to say thank you, because you've done yeoman service. You indicate you're going to continue to do yeoman service. And we want to make a small presentation to you to say thank you. It's not near enough, and we didn't buy you a book.
Good.
We bought you liquid refreshments plus a certificate for more. Because I couldn't even think of a book that's been produced in Cape Breton that you don't already have.
Well, I had one coming out yesterday. I was contributing the editor to Aqua by Pat O'Neill. Jim Foles, myself, beautiful book.
Well, you can put a little aqua with this and you'll enjoy it.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Boys, I just want to say, Peyton Chisholm is here, and I want to say thank you to Peyton, because we never had an opportunity, because Peyton managed the renovation that went on here 4 or 5 years ago. Did a great job. He had Nan Moore on his back continually, switching plugs and lights and everything else, and he got the job done, and it's turned into a wonderful upgraded facility, and Peyton pretty well single-handedly managed that. So Peyton, thank you for that service. Watch the news probably in the next 10 days or so. The Old Sydney Society has a major surprise that you'll all be pleased in. Thank you very much.